Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin. Wassalatu wassalamu ala asyrafil anbiya wal mursalin. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin. Praise be to Allah, the cherisher and the sustainer of the world, and blessing be on our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his family and his companions. In order to gain blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, let us begin the program by recitation of Kitab Al-Fatiha. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin. Ar-Rahmanir-Rahim. Maliki yawmiddin. Ihdinas siratal mustaqim. Siratal ladzina an'amta alaihim ghairil Amin amin ya rabbal alamin. Yang bahagia Profesor Emeritus Tan Sri Dato Dzulkifli Abdul Razak, Rector of IIUM. My respectful Dato Abdul Ahmad, the Executive Director of Management Service Divisions of IIUM. All IIM universities, management committee members, deans, directors, and administrative officers, top management and senior officials from other Malaysian public universities, government agencies, and staff associations, brothers and sisters. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera and warm welcome to the Iim Leadership Series number 1, 2020. First and foremost, I am honored to welcome our beloved Rector, Professor Emeritus Tan Sri Dato Dzulkifli Abdul Razak, for taking part in this Leadership Talk series. Thank you for making time to be with us, Tan Sri. Distinguished guests, brothers and sisters, the IIM Leadership Talk series is a signature program which is organized by the Management Service Divisions, and it is collaborated together with IIUM Professional and Management Association, PMA. And it is a platform where we can share wisdom, thought, and advice from the great leaders, especially from the education sector, as well as the corporate organizations. Last year, the organizer managed to conduct 4 series of leadership talks, which were conducted and attended by IIM community in the campus. However, today's session is a very special event because our program is viewed through a Zoom platform, and as well as the YouTube live streaming from our IIM website, not only attended by our staff, IIM staff community, but also can be viewed and accessed by our colleagues from other universities in Malaysia and our partners from abroad. Indeed, with this new norm due to pandemic situations, the online platform has becoming an essential tool for academics to share knowledge. Alhamdulillah, now we are able to share knowledge with anybody from various places in the world. Distinguished guests, brothers and sisters, without further ado, I am honored and pleased to invite Yang Bahagia Professor Emeritus Tan Sri Dato Dzulkifli Abdul Razak, Director of IIUM, to deliver his talk entitled The Essence of Resilient Leadership and How to Stay Resilient. Tafadhal mashkura Tan Sri.
Okay, thank you, Iim Leadership. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin. Wassalatu wassalamu syafil anbiya mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Let me first of all thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for giving us this opportunity to meet online. It is my first time doing this, and you need to understand that this is something that I'm learning also, to give a talk to a camera without seeing the audience listening to my talk, and I hope they are there, inshallah. This is also an opportunity for me to thank MSD for taking the interest in continuing the leadership talk that we have started last year, so that this idea of trying to impart leadership characteristic, virtues, and so on and so forth become the mainstay as far as I am concerned in trying to build an organization that all of us can be proud of. The title that was given to me indeed is very, very opportune, given the situation we are in, the coronavirus outbreak that all of us have experienced at least for a month, and know what this is all about. Yeah? So I'm trying to structure the talk in a way that it affects us in our experience as far as the MCO is concerned, and how do you actually look at leadership from that point of view, from that lens, so that we begin to craft another idea of what resilience is all about. I think the word resilient leadership is not new, but it is in the context of a different era where everything is normal, that you have some choices to do. But here, perhaps under the current situation, your choices are limited, and therefore we need to relook or understand or revisit what this idea of resilience is all about in order to stay relevant given the situation we are in, which will not end. I think in the shortest period of time. Some people say we will be here until the year 2022, and that means another 2 years. And therefore, how do you actually craft leadership, and how do you actually move on to make sure that we are still relevant in this particular context? Yeah. So I would like to thank MSD for giving me this opportunity, and I also would like to thank all of you who have taken time and interest in sharing some of these thoughts of mine. So let us begin by looking at a few ideas or statement that is related to this talk. All right. I would like to start with statements which is probably common to us. When we talk about what you do has far greater impact than what you say. Normally we say actions speak louder than words. Yeah. So that is one of the frame that I'm going to use, that in the context of resiliency, I think we are more interested in what you can convey, in what you can impact, rather than just saying words that has very little meaning in the context of this coronavirus that we are facing today. What is it that we can do? What is it that we can demonstrate so that people begin to understand what leadership is all about and what resiliency is all about in this particular context? Yeah. This is coming from a well-known author, Stephen Covey, the book of 7 Habits of Highly Effective Person. But there's another saying that I also want to share with you as a kind of a framework for this talk. This comes from Albert Einstein, who is not known for leadership as such, but he made, I think, a very pertinent statement by saying, setting an example is not the main means of influencing others, it is the only means. In other words, exemplary action is what we are talking about. Not just any action, not just anything that we want to do, but that action has to be exemplary so that it will touch people's heart, people's mind, so that people will begin to look at the example as something that will motivate them and also inspire them to move on, to make a difference in the context, what we are facing today. How do you actually make this happen is where I think this whole idea of resilience or resilient leadership becomes an important domain, right? So I would like to start by what do we mean by setting example, and how do you then use this example as a way to craft out this leadership that is based on resiliency. That will be the kind of approach that I will do as we move on into this talk, inshallah, in the next 45 minutes, or so. Now, resiliency, I think, has its own meaning, and let's look at what do we mean by resiliency in the context of crisis. Before that, I would want you to understand resiliency becomes very, very much applicable, very much wanted when you face a crisis, because this is where all of us are inundated with experiences that actually put us in a state of unstable, in a state of uncertainty, in a state of perhaps disruptive, that we need to find a bearing where we can make do with what we've got. And therefore the crisis state is an important state where you want to apply resiliency in this particular context. Yeah. But as the Chinese word for crisis, which is a two-word combination of danger and opportunity, I would want to stress on, for every crisis, although there is an element of danger, but we need to see how we can use that element to turn it into opportunities. And therefore, we want to look at crisis in a positive sense rather than just a negative sense, and leverage on the opportunity that is presented to us. Sometimes is an unlimited way how to make things better as we moved on. And this is, I think, an opportunity that is a chance of a lifetime. When we talk about the coronavirus outbreak, you will begin to see there are many blessings that is embedded in this coronavirus outbreak that we can use as an opportunity to leverage, to move forward, and in fact to change the whole landscape of what we've been experiencing for a long time to make it better as we move forward. But to do that, this is where I think the context of leadership becomes important. How do you begin to understand the word leadership given the crisis situation, given the opportunity that you need to leverage on, and how do you actually make this happen? So for that, let us start and understand what resilience is all about. Yeah, it comes from a Latin word which means to spring back, to come back from where you are in a situation which is equivalent to what it was, or in fact better in the state. Mechanically, you can talk about something that is like a spring that will bounce back, and that bouncing back is part of resiliency. Now, as far as we human is concerned, when we talk about resiliency, is our ability to recover, to move back into a state where we have been put in a very uncomfortable way, in a very disruptive way, in such a way that we are not overwhelmed, we are not succumbed by those states of affair. In other words, you are still very rational in your thinking, you are still very, very clear in what you want to do, that it does not disrupt your life at the same time. Now, this is something which is very, very different from what we understand when we talk about disruptive technology, for example. Often when we talk about disruptive technology, we human beings are supposed to be subservient to it. For example, when you talk about technology in the context of your devices, yeah, most of us somehow or other become quote unquote slave to those devices, as though we have been overwhelmed by those devices. Although we have been put in a situation where what we have done before is no longer applicable as far as these devices is concerned. So when we talk about resiliency in this particular context, it is something which is quite different from the disruptive technology or the disruptive paradigms that we always talk, where we need to conform. Here we do not have to conform in the context of trying to be where we were and trying to keep our humanity, in trying to keep our values, and also trying to be as human as possible despite whatever happens. And I think that's a main differentiation that I want to make when we talk about resiliency in the context of leadership, as we are going to embark on this earlier. Why the difference? The difference is because in the context of resiliency, as far as leadership is concerned, there are values attained to it. And here he says that some of the values or some of the characteristics that we need to have to be resilient as a leader is courage, strength, will, tenacity, discipline, and faith. It is not just something that you follow because everybody else is doing it. It is not because it is fashionable to do it. It is not because you are forced to do it, but this is something that we need to have a kind of a value base, and that value is the one that will decide whether you will be resilient, whether you'll be successful as a leader that embark on resiliency as such. Yeah. So this value is the one that I want to emphasize throughout the talk. We must have a basic value that will make us a leader that at the end of the day will be able to decide whether we want to move forward or whether we want to take some certain action based on the value that we have inherited to move forward as part of the resiliency movement as such. Yeah? So please bear this in mind, because we will come back to this idea of values as part and parcel of the leadership that we're going to talk about as we move on. Now, for example, we know when we talk about leadership, we always also focus on failures. Now, people always say failure is something that we cannot get rid of. indeed, failure, we have to understand it is part of success. In other words, we will not be successful until we experience failure. And that failure is a failure of the positive type, where resiliency becomes part and parcel of the inspiration to make you move forward. Yeah. So failure in this particular context does not come because you fall down or because you're not able to cope with a situation. Failure will only happen when you are not able to respond to it. And the responding part of it is where these values on resiliency becomes an important tool for us to move forward. Yeah. So people normally say, you don't quit. Not only you don't quit, but you will do whatever you need to do so that you go on doing what is right as far as moving forward to be a resilient leader, as it were. Now, let us come back to the situation we are in today. I think we have not seen how the virus looks like, but that probably is a good kind of metaphor of how this virus is all about. Yeah. Now, not only this virus, but this virus has until now imposed on us many things. And the two things that I want to focus on is a question of lockdown. Lockdown meaning that we are beginning to limit our ability to respond. Movement, mobility, and sometimes connectivity, and so on and so forth, in such a way that as a leader, we do not have the luxury of choice anymore. And this is where I think the value of being resilient becomes important. And this is where I think we're going to build this whole idea of leadership based on resiliency and remaining relevant as we move forward in trying to reshape the future. This is something that all of us has been listening all the time when we talk about how do we manage the coronavirus. It seems the formula is only about how do you flatten the curve, right? And the context of this is basically we are talking about the kind of resources that we have. We want to spread the resources over as many people who are affected by this so that these resources will also be given to other people who need it at the same time. And therefore, this whole idea of flattening the curve to me becomes another way of thinking of what leadership is all about. Now, if we do not flatten the curve, what does it mean? It means that everybody is for its own. I will develop something that is for my own. There is no collective response. There is no solidarity. There is no working together. And therefore, I only think about myself or my community or my family. All right. But in a situation we are in today, we begin to talk about how do we now begin to work together? How do we begin to collectively respond so that everybody will benefit from what we've got? And this is, I think, the key word or the key ways of trying to understand what this resilient leadership is all about. And if we also use this on a momentary basis, in other words, we will not be able to see the end of this because this virus will come back in different form. Bear in mind that this virus also has got its own resiliency in the sense of mutation. As we confront this virus, they are also going through the same process. As we try to inhibit their growth, they will mutate, they will become different virus in a different form that will affect us in different ways. So this is an issue that I think we need to stress on when we talk about resiliency and the context of leadership, as it were. So the question that we need to ask ourselves when we talk about physical distancing, and we talk about social distancing, there are two different concepts altogether. At the moment in time, all of us talk about social distancing. To me, when you talk about social distancing, meaning that you will not have social solidarity. In other words, I will try to move away from people socially speaking. I don't want to be in contact with them, that's fine. But I also don't want to work with them in the idea of trying to distance ourselves from them. Now, the right word and the right understanding when you talk about leadership is it's not social distancing, it is physical distancing. Physically, because of the environment we are given, we are not going to be physically close as before, because that could encourage the spread of virus. But that do not mean that socially we need to be also far away from them. So the whole idea of social distancing is not applicable. And when we talk about resilient leadership, we want to talk about social solidarity. When social solidarity comes in, then the chances of being resilient as a community, as a nation, and in fact as a world become even enhanced. So we need to put this idea of what social distancing and physical distancing is all about even before we moved on. Now, from what I've been hearing, at least in Malaysia, the word social distancing is very much used in a wrong context. If we say Malaysia must social distance itself, then we will not be able to create solidarity. We are not able to work together. We are not going to have this collective response that we want. What we want to do is we want to embrace physical distancing, but we also want to embrace at the same time social solidarity. I think that's the first thing that we need to put right before we go into this whole idea of what you call resilient leadership, as it were. Okay, until we are able to move together as a group, as a community, and then this whole idea of trying to tackle whatever disruption we've got will not be impactful because of the distancing that we are talking about or practicing, as it were. Now, there is this new document that just came out last month that talk about shared responsibility. You will not have shared responsibility if you practice social distancing. So you need to understand we need to have social solidarity before we can even have shared responsibility, before we can have, in this particular context, global solidarity as such. This came out from the United Nations, but I want to quote one of the statements coming from the United Nations Secretary General on this particular context, trying to give again the framework of what resiliency is all about. Now, he mentioned this, which is common to us, and I think IIUM just launched its RCE today, and he talks about our roadmap is the 2030 agenda, which is the agenda for education as part of it, and the 17 sustainable development goals. And this statement was made when he launched this particular report on the 7th of April, just recently. And the full statement says this: our roadmap is the 2030 agenda and the 17 sustainable development goal. And after that, he will emphasize everything we do during and after this crisis must be with a strong focus on building more equal, inclusive, sustainable economies and society that are more resilient. So here you are, the word resilient has been used by the United Nations Secretary General, but in the context of being more equal, in the context of being more inclusive, in the context of creating something which is sustainable. In other words, you are not going to have a curve which is not flattened. We cannot have the luxury of one group having dominating or being dominant in one area, whereas the other group needs to suffer because of that disparity or because of that divide or because of that discrimination, as it were. It will not happen in the context of resiliency in the face of the pandemics. Yeah? And what is a translation of this as far as United Nations is concerned? We look at climate change, for example. We look at other global challenges, including the coronavirus itself, which is new, which is not even expected to happen. So the key for all this, from my point of view, is basically until you are able to flatten the curve in the sense that we are all going to be equal, fair, and just, and creating into a sustainable future, then the hope of trying to conquer or trying to defeat this coronavirus outbreak will not be on our side. And hence, the understanding of resiliency will be defective as far as the leadership is concerned. Yeah. So taking from this, you begin to see sometimes this particular illustration is supposed to talk about we have got social, we have got physical, social distancing in the sense that everybody is wearing a mask now, a kind of solidarity that we agree. But here we do not have social distancing. And other people are still crowding together, and therefore, the spread of the virus becomes even more prominent in a particular case. So what I'm trying to put together is basically we need both. We need the physical distancing and the social solidarity at the same time before we can even craft what this leadership on resiliency is all about in the context of the coronavirus outbreak that we are facing today. All right. So let us move on by understanding this whole word of the new normal. Some people say, okay, now, because we are facing with a new kind of a virus that we do not have any treatment for, therefore we need to change our lifestyle. And the lifestyle is then crafted as what we call the new normal. The old normal is a normal that perhaps is the one that gives rise to the outbreak, and therefore we need to leave those normals and embrace another way of life. And I have a different view on this when you talk about the new normal, because I think the new normal is basically the old normal being crafted in a different way. And IIUM, for example, when we talk about the new normal, we are using these 5 other elements that we are talking about. The first normal that we need to understand is about cleanliness. Now, cleanliness is nothing new. In the context of our religion, Islam, cleanliness is up front, the top priority. Yeah, the very fact that we do wudu is before we pray to show that cleanliness is important. All right, but when we look around, however, cleanliness is not a priority in our community. I often cite our toilets, for example. Yeah, although we talk about cleanliness, but our toilet is never clean enough. And therefore, when we talk about this new normal, as it were, it is not the new normal. It is the old normal that has not been practiced. And I would like to coin another word called the renewed normal. Why do I want to do this? Because when we talk about the old normal being put into a new form, there is a kind of resiliency. There is a kind of understanding what we have left behind and will help us to bounce back the moment we use that, the moment we embraced it as part and parcel of our lifestyle. I don't want us to think about everything that we have learned before is irrelevant. And therefore, we need to think of something else. So when we talk about cleanliness, we only talk about sanitizers, for example. We only talk about technology, for example. What we have got and what we have been told before will not be relevant to us. And I think this will be a sad day if we are not able to differentiate what was relevant then, but not practiced until now, that needs to come back in the context of this renewed normal. Yeah? So as you go down the list, for example, cleanliness, from now on, if you were to be a resilient leader, that could be, that must be your top agenda. In other words, the resiliency in trying to make cleanliness as a top agenda must be there in everything that we do, because that will be the key thing that will flatten the curve, the key thing that will break the transmission of the virus from animal to human being, or even from human being to human being, right? The next on the list, we have got obedience or observant. In other words, all rules that relates to this must be observed in the context of is part and parcel of the primary duty that we need to do. It's just like at the ibadah. It's just like the amanah that is given to us. There is no way of skirting around it, because the moment you skirt around it, then you are exposing yourself again into whatever outbreak or whatever dangers or challenges that you are facing. Meaning to say that we need to be vigilant all the time. In other words, to understand where you are and what is the condition around this, and how then you can use some of these values to ensure that you are in a protected way looking at the kind of dangers or the situation we're in. For example, if you need to wear a mask, you wear a mask. For example, if you need to distance yourself more than just 1 meter, you need to do that, right? So there is this choice that you begin to shape the kind of leadership characteristic that you want to have given the situation, because we are vigilant at the particular situation or in the situation you are put into. Yeah? The fourth one is about being consistent, istiqamah, yeah, and understanding that is part and parcel of that resiliency that you're going to embrace at the end of the day, being a leader to move into the impactfulness of your practices. Last but not least is discipline. Discipline, in other words, to follow in the order that you are given, to make sure that whatever it is done, it is crafted in such a way that it is impactful at the end of the day. So I want to make an argument at the end of the day that we are not caught into this whole idea of new normal because somebody says so. I think we need, as a leader, to reflect whether the so-called new normal is beneficial to us, or is it just another word that has been thrown away because there is also this whole idea of cultural bias when we define what the new normal is. And that, I think, often enough is not taken into consideration. Let me go into the next slide, yeah, to understand where the values are, and therefore these values must be part and parcel of our roots, so that we understand where we are going as far as resiliency is concerned. Now, this is another example when we talk about the new normal. Yeah, for a long time, I think in our community, at least in the Western community, or at least between genders, shaking hand is not a normal for us. All right, it was introduced to us, maybe through colonization, maybe through interaction with other communities, that now we begin to think that handshake is the way forward. All right. But because of the coronavirus, because of the outbreak, now somebody has said, no, handshake will not happen anymore, because this will be a way of transmitting those viruses. And people are saying now, we do not do handshake, and everybody else is not doing handshake anymore. Yeah? But for us, at least between gender, we do not do handshake. So there is nothing new as far as we are concerned. Yeah? Now we're inventing many other ways of wishing. You can see from the picture, either you wave, you put your hand on the heart, that's where we used to practice, you use the namaste and so on and so forth. All of this is a kind of a greeting that do not introduce context. Now, therefore, when you say this is a new normal, to me, it is not a new normal. It is an old normal that we have forgotten for some reason or the other, that now that needs to be brought back. Yeah. Why do I say this? Because then we begin to place the values that we have had for a long time and bring it forward again as part of the resiliency that we want to talk about, right? I'll give you another example. I think in Japan, for example, yeah, there's never been a contact between two people in the sense of greeting, right? They will always bow, and there are also different ways of bowing. You bow the most when you are in a sorry state, when you have done something wrong, you need to apologize. You bow slightly higher when you say thank, and just hello, a slight bow. Now, I'm trying to put a picture. For example, we have got ways of tackling this using our own cultural values, using our own norms, and using our own civilization. They do not have to be defined by the so-called new normal sets as well, right? So I want you to understand, as we talk about resiliency, values, culture, and civilization make part of this when we want to define what the leadership is all about, right? So Japanese has got their own understanding of what resiliency is all about. They say, never give up, fall down 7 times, get up 8. In other words, within the Japanese culture, this whole idea of resiliency, fighting, making things better, You know, that's why they are good in continuous assessment, the Kaizen and so on and so forth. These are all part of the understanding of what resiliency leadership is all about. Bouncing back, creating better solution, making better alternative so that they gives you a higher impact as you move on and creating better leadership as far as the Japanese is concerned, and they now become almost the model as far as leadership is concerned moving forward. Now, let us do this on a more general scale. I talked to you earlier that there are values that you need to attach to in the context of resiliency, not just something which is mechanical, right? So the values that we talked about are the 6 values. One is will, tenacity, strength, courage, discipline, and faith. Now, to be resilient, you must have the will, you must have the tenacity, you must have the determination to put things right by taking on a different approach altogether. Yeah. In other words, when you are down, when you are being challenged, when you are stressed, you cannot take this as though this is the final outcome of what you do. You need to fight back. And to fight back, you must have that willpower to fight back. Yeah? And that willpower is determined on the kind of determination that you have that is built on the strength that you have got. In other words, you need to recognize what your strength is. Not just your weaknesses. I think your weaknesses perhaps is taken care by the challenges that you are not able to respond, but you also must understand what your strength is. And that is the strength that all of us must recognize as part and parcel of the courage that we need to develop to move forward. Right? When we talk about leadership, from my point of view, from the little that I see, most leaders do not have courage. Most leaders, when they are confronted with issues that is disadvantage to them, they are not able to vocalize or articulate or make sure that their point of view are understood so that they are not disadvantaged. I think in the context of the coronavirus, you see many things that are now pushing you to a state that you are sometimes unable to respond or not wanting to respond. So the elements of courage, to be resilient, the elements of courage is important. To me, perhaps is absolutely important, because that's where you begin to push back. And this is where the elements of discipline becomes an important element, because you need to do it as part and parcel of that strategy to be a leader that will move resilience forward. And then it becomes part and parcel of your belief. It becomes a part and a parcel of the kind of strategy that is engraved or embedded in your leadership style, that you need to push back when you need to push back. Remember when I talked about earlier, when you talk about setting examples, you begin to set your own examples so that other people will recognize that these are leadership that will not take things lying down. In fact, they will fight back if they need to fight back, because of the belief that you have got, that you need to do right, that you need to give justice, that you need to be fair, but you need to fight back because of those natures, those values that we talked about. Yeah. So the 6 values to me is important if you want to be resilient. Yeah. You must have the willpower, you must have the determination, you must know where your strengths are, you must craft it into a kind of a courage, and that courage is based on total discipline, so that you are not scared to move. You are not cowed by people who say something that will probably threaten you, and that is where your belief becomes the moving factor to be a resilient leader. Yeah, and all of this must act in a tandem. It cannot be just one and the rest do not work. It must be in a tandem, that there is a balance, yeah, between what you think and what you feel, between what your mind says and what your heart says. People often talk about mindfulness, but we are also going to talk about heartfulness. These 2 elements must work together in the sense of trying to create the resiliency that you are wanting to move forward as a leader, as it were. this is why I think at the end of the day, we want to talk about resiliency as a mode of creating a balanced lifestyle. We are not going to do resiliency just for the sake of it. There is an end point why we want to take resiliency, to a point that it will create a balanced lifestyle, so that that lifestyle become the norm of how we're going to live forward. We are not going to create another curve that needs to be flattened. Yeah, as you can see just now, if you don't do resiliency in a balanced way, you create another curve that will deprive others of fairness, justice, and equitability. So this whole idea of resiliency is coming back to how do you actually create a lifestyle that is balanced, a management way of that is balanced, a leadership in a context that is balanced. Now, we have seen when everything is gone out of balance or imbalance, the challenges is what we see today. Part and parcel of this whole issue of the coronavirus is, I believe, a life that is imbalanced. Let me give an example. Yeah? If it is true that it comes from a wet market in a place in China, what is the imbalance? In the imbalance is that we do not only now talk about what we consume. There is an imbalance in the way we consume things. And that imbalance of consumption has now created another kind of a problems that we need to deal with, not only because of you, but because of the spread of everything around the world. So this whole idea of creating a balance out of this resilient leadership is something that I think it is important as an endpoint. You don't want to bounce back and create another imbalance, yeah, in the context of moving it too far ahead out of the curve that we have talked about earlier. Yeah? So this whole idea of climate change, terrorism, political distancing, the kind of illness we see are all examples of the lifestyle which is imbalanced. In other words, we have lost also that resiliency leadership that we talked about earlier. Now, how do you then move from there? Yeah, the only way I think is to learn again about resiliency. And what is the best way to learn is to look at nature, because nature is endowed with this element of resiliency as part and parcel of how nature survives. As you can see around us, no matter how much beating that nature is given, at the end of the day, they will survive. This is a picture that I took a year after wildfires. Normally, wildfire will destroy everything. But at the end of the day, because of the resiliency that nature provides, you find that things are beginning to grow again. And it is not because we humans make sure that they grow on their own. And this is where I come back to the whole idea of the internal strength, the internal courage that we are endowed with that will allow us to grow again if we put this in the context that is supposed to be there, right? I want to go into a very specific idea as a kind of a metaphor. Yeah, here is a metaphor that says storm makes tree takes deeper roots. All right, to me, is a very meaningful metaphor. As you are, undergoing through storm, and sometimes the tree needs to bend. Yeah, but you find that the tree do not break. Why? Because they are very well rooted. To me, well-rooted means the value that you possess are strong enough to make sure that you do not break. Despite all the challenges, you are able to be in that determination that we talked about, the strength that you have, and also the courage to push back to make it better. Right? So what does it say here? Yeah? When life's strong winds come blowing, bend with them and let go. In other words, there are times as leaders you need to give way. There are times as leaders you need to allow and so for some compromise so that you are not broken. And that doesn't mean that you are taking a step backwards. That is just a strategy for you to allow things to happen before you respond accordingly. Yeah. By bending, you will become stronger in new places. In other words, by compromising or taking a compromise. You are developing another way of looking or strategically thinking of how to move forward. In other words, you have built another new capacity so that that capacity will be the new strength or the new courage for you to move forward. It is not just taking it as though you have now receded into a path that you will not be able to push forward. In fact, it is in the converse. You learn what is good, and therefore you begin to take on a different strategy and a different strength. By letting go, you will make new rooms for the new and the better. Again, yeah? And when you talk about the new and the better, this is where people are beginning to talk about the new normal. The new normal is something which is really very new, that you begin to add on to the tools or the strategy that you have. This will be then something that you can leverage as you move into a new situation without forgetting the old norms and the old value that I stressed to you earlier. Okay? So I like this metaphor because you see trees around you all the time. And the trees will remind you that this is part and parcel of nature's resiliency. And if we are part of nature, then we must be endowed with the same resiliency, except that we do not practice it. Except that sometimes we do not even care about this resiliency because we are so out of touch with nature as such. Yeah? A good example is in this particular case. I just want to illustrate here. You can see here there's a very stormy day or stormy night. Yeah? But this man here needs to hold on to a tree because this tree is rooted. This man metaphorically is not rooted. If he let go of the tree, he will be blown away. Yeah? So I want to emphasize again, to be rooted to values is something that is so useful before we even talk about resiliency, because at the end of the day, the resiliency must have a reference, and that reference point is where your roots are in the context of values. I think this picture is something that is familiar to all of us. Yeah? We are asked to observe lockdown. Yeah? What does lockdown means? Lockdown means we are taking away ourselves from the larger picture that we are always engaged with. Yeah? We are supposed to stay home, right? But staying home does not mean that we are giving up. I think this is the message that needs to be delivered. Yeah? Staying home does not mean that we are giving up, we are taking things easy, but staying home means we are beginning to think, to plan, and also to structure things to move forward, right? So staying home here means you need to practice the 6 elements that I talked to you about. How do you build your willpower, your determination? How do you build your strength? How do you build your courage? And how do you build your belief? In the translation that we've got, you used to use masks. You need to wash your hands. You need to not to touch your face, or all the things that have been mentioned to us over and over again, right? Why is this important? Because that is part and parcel of building the resilience within yourself that you will then be able to master and fight against the coronavirus, not in a physical sense. Yeah, you will not be able to win this battle against the coronavirus in a physical sense, as our auntie is trying to do here. Right? So in resilient leadership, it is more a strategic way of moving forward by building your own capacity, by building your own what you call willpower, as I mentioned to you earlier, not something that you want to demonstrate in the sense of physically, because the enemy that you are fighting is an enemy that you will not be able to see. Okay? And Al-Ghazali summarizes very well when he talks about fighting an enemy that you do not see. He says you need to get rid some of the enemies within you, things like egoism, things like conceitedness, things like greed, things like lust. All these are the enemies that you need to clean up so that your strength and your willpower becomes even more enhanced to fight those kind of enemies moving forward. It is not something that is directly as a kind of a physical fight that you see in this particular context. Yeah. So the idea of a lockdown in this particular case has got its own meaning to us. And this is where I think we need to talk about again in the context of this flattening the curve, so that the curve that is flattened because we have taken an action to redistribute, to create justice, and to be equitable in the long term as far as the community is concerned, right? If you look at bamboo as a kind of nature's way of teaching what resiliency is all about, there's much to learn from this. Yeah, just look at bamboo alone. What has nature given them? Yeah, they all grow very high. When they bend, they will bend, but they do not break. Bamboos in such a way that they grow again in clusters. You seldom find bamboos grow alone. They grow in clusters. This is a social solidarity that we talked about. When they grow in clusters like that, they become stronger. When the wind blows, they will bend, but they do not break. I think that's the first lesson that we need to learn as far as resiliency from nature is concerned. Secondly, they are very deeply rooted. Again, we go back to the idea of roots. We go to the idea of values. We go to the idea of what we believed in that will be our push back factor when we are challenged or we are pushed to take a different path. Yeah? But yet they are flexible. They are not rigid. Sometimes I know we have got belief, but our belief is so rigid that the moment we are pushed, we break, because there is no flexibility in the way we manage our beliefs. I think that flexibility is something, again, that is important, right? But more importantly, if you look at bamboo, inside bamboo is hollow. You would probably think bamboo, because it's tough, it's a solid thing inside. Yeah? That hollowness to some people is a mark of wisdom. In other words, you are not preoccupied with something that actually distracts you. Your mind remains open. Your mind remains flexible in trying to consider other alternatives and other solutions using these elements of wisdom that we talked about. When I talk about wisdom, I talk about two things. One is a flexibility of thinking that gives you different solution, different point of view, different strategy, and you are also adaptable to it. The adaptability will give you that leeway of trying to find a way out when you are met with certain conditions as such. At the end of the day, what this means to me is basically how humble we are in trying to find a solution by adapting to whatever is available, as long as the value system remains the same. We are not going to be very rigid, because it will not solve the problem that rigidity presents a kind of a breaking point in many parts of the decision making as we move forward. So bamboo to me gives a very good example, a reminder of what resiliency is all about, what sort of leadership characteristic that we want to take on when we want to move into a disruption as we are facing in today. It also means, when we talk about wisdom, it also means that the mind must be at a state that it can be operationalized, because it is not muddled with certain things. Yeah, there is another proverb that I want to introduce. It is only in still water we can see things. Now, when we are faced with challenges as big as the coronavirus, we must have a clear mind so that we know what the solution is all about. Here is a picture metaphorically done for you. When the water is clear, you can see the fish swimming under the water, right? Means to say that we are able to go in depth of what we are supposed to see and what we are supposed to capture as a probable solution to our problem, as it were. So we must practice, and we must know how to keep the mind still in trying to find a solution. You don't go into a state of anxiety. You don't go into a state of mental health that will distract you. You don't go into a state of depression or whatever it is, but you must keep your mind in a healthy state. And that is, I think, part and parcel of this resiliency as leadership that we talked about, right? Now, the contrast to this, we cannot see our reflection in running water. Imagine this is a running water, yeah? Unlike the first picture where we can see fishes swimming below it, when your mind is muddled, you are not able to transcend those values and see where you are in the context of trying to find a solution. So what it means that before you go into a resilient leadership, you must have got the capacity to actually keep your mind in an open state, to keep your thinking in an unmuddled state, because that will be the strength that you will need to use as you want to look for a solution moving out of the challenges that you are in. Okay? So I would like just to probably just summarize that in building resiliency, there are many ways of doing it. Yeah. But in the context of what we are now facing, the lockdown context, we are, as I've mentioned, have very little option, externally at least, but internally the action is still very much available to you if you are able to harness this. Let us take an example. Yeah. In the lockdown situation, we have seen emotion becomes a very vulnerable state. I listened to one professor of psychiatry, I think over the CNN, that talks about, at least in the United States, as far as she's concerned, the stress level has gone up 900%. In our own university, you begin to see this. Yeah. So these are cases where we find that in a situation of a lockdown, we become very vulnerable emotionally. And once you're vulnerable emotionally, then your leadership, your resiliency will also go out at the same time. So how do you maintain that is another what we call a way of looking how to build this resiliency. Some people will relate it to spirituality, meditation, contemplativeness, are all a way to manage this. And I think that's another skill that you need when you talk about this resilient leadership, as it were, right? We talk about the ecology, for example. Under lockdown, we begin to see the ecological change begins to see very differently. Yeah, I think there are reports saying that there are now no longer pollution the way we see it before the lockdown. Yeah, some of the rivers are clean and so on and so forth. What does it mean? It means that the moment we control our needs and our greed, we begin to shape different environment, and that the environment will be the environment that eventually will be a plus point to us when we talk about resiliency moving forward. Yeah? We have talked about social distancing, social solidarity as part and parcel of the resiliency of skills that you need. You need to build that on rather than leaving it aside. You talk about cultural dimension just now when we talk about handshakes, whether we need to take this as a new normal or the renewed normal or the old normal. These are something, again, that is up in question when we are in a situation of the lockdown. Economy is another one. I think most of us, when we look at this coronavirus, at the end of the day, will look at this as an economic crisis rather than a humanitarian crisis. Yeah. So we allow people to go and do shopping, although sometimes it threatens more death, because to us, economy is more important than life at a certain point. So I think, again, yeah, in the context of resilient leadership, you need to make the balance that I mentioned to you about. How do you balance the economic needs and the humanitarian needs in the context of trying to build a new future, as it were? So in the context of lockdown, the resiliency understanding how to build a leadership becomes an important decision that we need to make. And here is where I think we want to introduce our own idea of what this resiliency is all about, in the words of our own indigenous word, that is the Sejahtera Initiative. We are going to talk about the Sejahtera Initiative that takes care of the 10 nexus of spiritual, ethical, emotional, intellectual, and psychological, and the rest of it. How do you then assemble this as part and parcel of the makeup for the leadership that will want to practice resiliency moving forward as a kind of a solution. We know this word sejahtera, right? But I don't think we fully understand it. Yeah, we've got the word salam sejahtera. We've got this song Sejahtera Malaysia. We've got even terminal in the airport at one point called Terminal Sejahtera. And in Kelantan, you also got a word called Tandas Sejahtera. I mean, the word has been bandied around. Yeah? But few of us are able to articulate this. And given the lockdown that we are facing today, this word sejahtera has no meaning at all until we reconceptualize it again in the way that I'm going to present to you after this, right? So let's start with this whole idea of sejahtera initiative. What do we mean when we talk about it in the form of resiliency leadership? First of all, I think in the sejahtera leadership, we want to talk about us as a human being first, rather than anything else. Because as I mentioned to you, the values that we've got is the values of being human. And being human in the sejahtera understanding is to understand yourself as a spiritual being, because that's where the value gets embedded. That's where the rooting of the value is, and that's where the value is able to decide what is ethical and what is not ethical, to decide whether you need to be emotional over it or otherwise. So these three elements of spirituality, emotion, and also ethical make the basis of someone to be resilient in the true words of a leader, right? And where does that come from? That comes from the inner context of the human being that makes human, and this is the heart or the cult in this particular case. Yeah, you need to nurture the heart. You need to understand what the heart represents to you as a human being that embraces this three value of spirituality, of emotions, and also of ethics at the same time, right? That therefore gives us a kind of a framework of what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. There's a kind of a framework that tells you what resiliency is all about as far as we are concerned, right? That defines us, and that's defined the kind of a framework that we need to work on. Within this framework, then we begin to build other capacity in terms of the intellectual as a human being as well. You talk about the cognitive part, you talk about the psychological part, and you talk also about the intellectual part that breaches the five senses of touch, sight, hearing, smell, and taste. But mind you, these do not work alone. The difficulty that we have, or at least I have to understand this, as though the mind and the five senses work alone, and there is no connection between the heart that I talked to you about earlier. How do you connect these two will determine the sign of resiliency that we're able to afford at the end of the day when these connections are met. Yeah. Once you make this connection, then you're able to then perform. On the macro level, how do you want to practice this leadership of yours in the context of the ecology, the economy, the culture, and also the societal sort of dimension? In other words, you're always safeguarded. You're always guided by the red circle, which is basically the outer limit of what is permissible and what is not permissible before you get out of balance. In other words, coming back to the whole idea of resiliency in this particular context to keep the balance intact as far as your leadership is concerned, right? And that balance is a continuous balance. It is not a balance at one time, but it's a continuous balance as a lifestyle. You must keep this balance ongoing, depending on where you are and the situation you are in, so that you are not taken out of that particular context. If I were to draw this on a side view to give us some more perhaps indication of what this is all about, yeah. There you have got the connectivity between the brain and the heart, which is important as far as these two elements working together. Yeah? That is the one that finally will decide where you are in the context of ecology, where you are in the context of economics, where you are in the context of culture, and where you are in the context of society. The values that is brought out is an inside-out process that we decide what is apt for the ecology, the economy, the culture, and the society at the same time. In other words, you are always in control to ensure that the balance is always there. And that is where I think the idea of trying to be resilient, because you know what the limits are, and therefore you can always bounce back, because the moment you exceed or transgress those limits, the heart will signal you that you are now moving away from the balance to the imbalance, and you quickly then will correct yourself to be back where you are in the state of balance as such. Yeah. Otherwise, we are in this particular state now. Yeah, we are working only on the 5 senses. All right, mentally, and beginning to operate on just one dimension, as I mentioned to you earlier, the economic dimension. You are not taking the balance of the other 3 of the ecology, the society, and also the culture. Already, we are in a state of imbalance as a human person, because the other dimensions are not taken care, and we are already in the state of imbalance. And this is why we go into the excesses of life very quickly, because the state of balance is no longer there. And how do you restore this is where we need to come back and understand this resiliency that I talked to you about. Let me try and summarize that. Yeah. So to start off with, I think before you go into this resiliency leadership, you need to recognize who we are. And these are the 10 elements that I talked to you about. Yeah. The cognitive, the cultural, the ecological, the emotional, ethical, economics, and the societal. And if you assemble this word well, you end up with the word spices, right? From spiritual right down to the society, how you work as a micro, in a macrocosm into the microcosm, from the individual to the society at large. And this, I think it's not clear there, but it's about how do you spice it up? How do you actually balance it in the context of this resiliency? So I want to end up by just taking another quote here. Yeah, people who are resilient, given that kind of what do you call individual understanding, they create a powerful vision, the belief that I talked to you about for their success, and look for the opportunities in all their experience. So it allows you that flexibility, the adaptability, the wisdom that we talked to you about is something that allows you to explore as much opportunity as possible, so at the end of the day, we easily bounce out of the kind of situation we are put into. We can then stay relevant. Yeah, by staying relevant here is an example that we create, not by force, which what I mean is basically you need to be the first person that leads you. It's difficult to get other people to lead you if you are not leading yourself. Yeah, you earn the right to lead others when they see you lead your own life well. All right. So in other words, it becomes almost a natural way of leadership within yourself, because you know now how to act, how to limit your action, how to be resilient when the time comes, and how to maintain your compose and posture because of the example and not because you are forced to. What do I mean by forced to? I am really worried now that we undergo this challenge of the corona virus. We conform and we adopt certain things, but it's only for a matter of time. Once this coronavirus is over, if it's over at any time point, yeah, then we will go back to where we were. Yeah, what we used to practice, we will forget it. We will go back to the lifestyle that actually invites other sign of imbalances, other forms of challenges that at the end of the day will put us in the same state of mind once again, right? So the whole idea of this resiliency leadership is for you to inculcate it within yourself so that from now on, it becomes a part and parcel of your lifestyle, a part and a parcel of your culture, a part and parcel of your belief that you need to practice this way. Doesn't matter whether there is coronavirus or not, cleanliness is top of the agenda. Doesn't matter if there is a challenge, social solidarity is something that we must maintain. Yeah, doesn't matter what is the situation. Some of these values that we have forgotten needs to be brought back, because that defines us in the terms of values as far as we are concerned, as a community, as a human being, as this whole fight against whatever challenges that we are going to move forward. It's not an option anymore. It is something that we need to hold on to, because this will define whether we will survive future ahead in times of other outbreaks or other challenges moving forward. And people have been telling us that the coronavirus is not the first and the last. There are many more. And so until and unless we develop this kind of resiliency that we talked about, then we will not be able to maintain moving forward. My last slide is basically to just conclude this. Yeah? We talk about set good example. If we set good example as a kind of a practice that we do, then we should be able to strike the balance that I talked to you about. Yeah, the balance of what is possible and what is not possible. What is the limit that you do not transgress, so that you are always in that context of being the human being that will be respectable, because you maintain the balance within yourself, right? That will then allow you to go into this whole idea of being sejahtera, the 10 elements, from being spiritual to being psychological, to being intellectual, cognitive, cultural, emotional, ethical, economics, and finally to build a kind of society that is balanced at the same time. And all of this can only happen if you are rooted on these values that we talked about. Yeah, to be resilient, for example, you need the values of willpower, the determination, the strength that you need to build out so that you have the courage to actually push to make things better. You have the courage to be disciplined on certain things. Yeah, that will be important for us to build a kind of a belief, a kind of a faith that will take us forward in creating better futures. Yeah, those are the elements that I think at the end of the day will need to be put together, connecting the minds and the heart, connecting what is tangible and what is intangible, connecting what is individual and what is communal, yeah, so that we will stay together as a community that will, at the end of the day, look after each other and then make sure that the resiliency factor is a factor that at the end of the day will be part and parcel of the solution, or if not, the what you call the barrier that will push all other challenges away from us as we move forward into the future. So I will stop there. I hope I've given you some ideas of what this resiliency leadership in the context of a lockdown. Yeah. Otherwise, I think there are other ways of defining this. Looking at the 2 months or the 3 months experience, when we have a lockdown, when we are compromised in many ways, we are compromised only to the externalities, but not within ourselves, because those are the areas that we need to grow to be part and parcel of this resiliency leadership that we talked about. So on that note, I will stop here. If there's any question, if there's any clarification, if there's any debates, I am quite open to this. So, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much, Tan Sri, for your insightful thought and given topic. I am sure that everyone has benefited a lot from your talk and input. If I can pick up some of the points that you have mentioned just now, to be a resilient leader, one must have the ability to recover or bounce back quickly. And in that individual, the leaders must possess or equipped with the strong values, and it is rooted in the heart. And the last one, in that individual or the leaders must perceive failure as an opportunity to improve oneself. Yeah, Tan Sri. For your information, Tan Sri, Alhamdulillah, based on our session, we have almost 200 users reaching us through our Zoom applications. And it is approximately 50 viewers that view our session through YouTube live streaming.
Okay.
So this is kind of new norm that I think in the future we will have, Tan Sri. Everybody can receive information and knowledge from this kind of sessions. So I think we can allow some few questions from the Zoom audience.
Yes.
Yeah, Tan Sri?
Yes, please.
And then, so for you who would like to ask question, if you look at the menu in your Zoom features, there is a icon colored in blue, raise hand. You may click on that, and you can unmute your microphone and switch on your video camera, and you may ask question to our beloved Rector. And kindly introduce your name and where are you from, which institution or department. So I would like to open question from the members.
I've got a few thank you messages, congratulations messages. Thanks for those. It appears on my screen.
Yeah, we saw it, Tan Sri. Any questions?
Good morning.
Okay. Good morning.
Good morning.
I don't know what's wrong with my screen. It's not working. But if you can hear me, can I pose ask a question now?
You can hear. Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much, Tan Sri. I'm Visalachi Balakrishnan from University of Malaya.
Yes.
And I'm very, very interested in resilience. It's a value practiced in Singapore for centuries, and you realize that they're applying it in schools, plus in their workplace and everywhere. I have been pushing for these values in moral and civics education, and hopefully by 2025, we are going to put it officially in our syllabus.
Yeah.
My main question is, there are conflicts between what you just mentioned in your entire talk about resilience in comparison with norms and religious practices. Many of the religions will tell our people that you are supposed to leave it to God. God decides. God is giving you virus. So just leave it to God, and God knows what to do. But I realized that you did not bring spirituality into your talk. How do we face such problems when we bring resilience to the school system? Because you can't teach resilience at an age where people are too hard. You spoke about buluh. And you know the buluh, if you don't ban the buluh when they are young, it's never going to happen. So I need your advice there, Tan Sri. Thank you.
Okay, I talked earlier, I think I make a particular emphasis that although you believe, but there must be flexibility. You know, that flexibility is not a flexibility to compromise, but a flexibility to understand deeper. My issue when we talk about religion, I think the depth of understanding is normally very superficial. Yeah, and therefore, when we go into religious classes, we are not allowed to ask questions. And not asking questions means, in other words, you are not able to root deeper. You're not able to understand what is the essence of that ruling or that argument or that understanding that allows us to understand it even better and to make yourself more convinced about this. Yeah, where you want to do this, I think it's just a matter of time. For younger children, you probably want to give them a kind of a guideline so that they have this flexibility of choice. I'll give you a simple example. I mean, this is my experience when I go to one of the pesantren in Gontor. I think most of my colleagues has gone to Gontor. Yeah? They have done a very successful pesantren. When they teach the children, they always give the children a kind of a flexibility to make choices within that rate framework that I talked to you about. We already defined the rate framework. What is it that you are allowed to do? But within that, they are allowed to make choices. And they are not said, this is A, this is B, and you are not allowed to, you know, to exchange those. A simple example, I was there for 3 days and 3 nights. Yeah? I participated subuh with them. My first subuh, there was no kunut. Yeah? And my second subuh, there was kunut. And my third subuh, there was no kunut. In Malaysia, this will cause a big row. Because you don't read kunut, some people may say your semayang tak sah. And I begin to understand that some people say banyak orang tak semayang subuh pasal dia tak faham kunut. Or tak boleh baca kunut. So they might as well not pray. You know. But here I asked the rector, I say, why do you allow this? Some boleh, some tak boleh. Dia kata, look, we have taught our imam in such a way that they can make the choice whether they want to read kunut ataupun tidak. You know, because they have been taught in such a way that that flexibility is within their ambit. And they are not going to define it as such that this must be done in this way and therefore not the other way. So I think that flexibility, I emphasize that flexibility, this is where the buluh is all about. Yeah, the buluh, again, you know, as the buluh grow, there are saying when the buluh is so high, but when the buluh grows so high, the bend is even, yeah, maknanya the higher you go, the more humble you are. You don't dictate terms to other people, you don't tell people what to do, but yet you open their mind to make decisions on what this decision needs to be made. I use the word spirituality, I don't use the word religion. Because religion, we begin to focus on religiosity, and religiosity sometimes misunderstood by people is something just external. The way you dress and the kind things you wear, and you begin to judge people from the external. And spirituality to me is something which is quite different. Your external may be something else, but your internal will be something else. Sometimes you don't imagine people who are more pious than without having any external indication that they are pious and so on and so forth. So the choice of words, the kind of flexibility, I think needs to be put in place. If you don't have that, then we will not be able to bridge this. I share your sentiment. I share your sentiment. For example, when you talk about this coronavirus, half of the issues revolves around religion, you know, and we are not sure why this is so, but I guess it's because of that rigidity in thinking that we think that we are not allowed to think beyond what we are able to think. I hope I'm right. Did I answer your question?
Yes, Tan Sri. Thank you very much, Tan Sri.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much. Tan Sri, we got one question from the Zoom group chat. Mr. Shafiq from USM, Shafiq Aziz.
Okay.
He is asking you, how do we want to be istiqomah in becoming a resilient person or leader?
How do we
want to be istiqomah?
Well, my understanding of istiqomah is one is of consistency. Yeah. I think a leader must exhibit this kind of a consistency in principle. All right. In other words, you are not going to be blown left, right, and center just because you want to preserve your position as a leader. All right. And oftentimes I see this happening. People move from left to right because you don't want to vacate your leadership position. You want to secure that, and therefore your principle also away from left, right to center. In other words, when I talk about that belief earlier, you don't have a core belief. Your belief is just like what some people say, a chameleon belief. You know, your color changes from time to time. Your color changes from situation to situation. You don't take a position that you are scared to take a position because then you will be compromised in your position as a leader. And I think that's not leadership. I think that's basically a cowardice way of being a follower. Yeah, and I think perhaps this kind of people compromise the whole organization at the same time. You as a leader need to be istiqamah in the sense that you hold to a principle. The amanah that was given to you is nothing that you can compromise on. If it's black, then it remains black. It doesn't matter whether somebody says yellow or purple or green, it will remain black, and you will defend that it is black, you know. And alhamdulillah, if you do this, with the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, your sincerity will bear you out. The truth will bear you out. And I think you do have no other worries, yeah, that you need to cut corners, you need to do all sorts of things just because you want to please one or two people and displease a lot more people because of your own self-interest. So that istiqamah to me means that way. Once you take a position and you know that position is the one that you want to hold on to, and you're quite sure that's the position that you want to defend, then you defend. But if your position is wrong by any means, yeah, then be humble enough to change it. I'm not saying that again, yeah, you need to stick to it, even though it's wrong after a while. For example, yeah, if I say now, as a rector of IIUM, you can defend yourself through virus by injecting disinfectant. Katalah, yeah. And somebody say, hey, rector, this is wrong. Now I cannot say, no, it is right. You know, I will say that I'm wrong. I'm sorry. Disinfectant, you cannot inject it. You will die first before the virus gets onto you. So these are the humility part. These are also the istiqamah part. And these were the balance that I talked to you about. It is often not a one-way traffic. It is the balancing act that brings truth. And we are here in the university to look for truth. And once the truth is approached, then I think we, inshallah, will be there. But the courage that I talked to you about is something which is real, at least in Malaysia. To have the courage to stand by your position and not be compromised just because somebody says something else without inspection or without any basis for it. I hope Shafiq, I think I know Shafiq. I hope Shafiq understands it, otherwise she can call me on the phone.
Thank you very much. Now we are reaching to 12 noon. Tan Sri, can we allow another one question? Prof?
Go ahead. I can stay with you one whole day. Not a problem.
Alhamdulillah. Okay, Tan Sri, can I allow one question from the Zoom audience?
Yes.
Because we got from the group chat.
Yep.
Anybody want to ask questions?
Assalamualaikum, Tan Sri.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullah.
This is Suhaimi from Kuliah Economics.
Oh, Suhaimi. Okay.
Thank you, Tan Sri. Work from home.
Alhamdulillah.
Okay, Tan Sri, are you talking about...
How's the orang kampung, by the way?
Alhamdulillah, all well.
Alhamdulillah.
So now they already start working and do some small business.
Okay.
Tan Sri, talking about the social solidarity, we're talking about we are in the big organizations. We have hierarchies, departments, very mechanistic.
Yeah.
The gap is widening.
Yeah.
And furthermore, people are divided by blocks, building, distance. And when come to solidarity, it's like a very difficult. And even the faculty members also divided. Now it's more when we don't meet anymore, just on Zoom, etc. So how, this is challenging. During the face-to-face, we already have problem with, we already had this, what I call social distancing. Now with this work from home, more distant. Then how can we achieve the sejahtera of social solidarity and to have also the shared responsibility? So this is very very challenging. This is what I felt now. Becoming lonely at home without the colleagues, only on Zoom, on screens. We don't have the touch, the spiritual touch, and etc. So, what is your response, Sri? Thank you.
I can only answer for myself. I don't know how other people view this, but I think it's a sense of purpose. I think the sense of purpose. Remember, one day I emailed you and say, how is orang kampung? You know, have they got enough to eat? Do they need help and stuff like that? I think it's a sense of purpose that binds us. My sense of purpose and your sense of purpose, if it's the same, then we are together. It doesn't matter where we are, how far we are apart, because that sense of purpose will keep us in touch. I will be reminded of you, you will be reminded of me. When I say, what happened to Swami? Whether is he all right ataupun tidak, you know? So it is not the building, it is not the place. Sometimes we sit in the same room, we do not even share the same sense of purpose. One nak jadi professor, satu lagi nak jadi I mean the way we craft our own aspiration also not the same. So bagi university like IIUM, I think our sense of purpose must be the same, and this is where we go on and keep on telling ourselves this Khalifah, Amanah, Ikraq and Rahmatan lil Alamin is a sense of purpose that all of us must share. If you don't share this sense of purpose in IIUM, then I don't see why you must be in IIUM. You know, you must as well go to some other places that have got a different sense of purpose that is akin to you. Then I think you'll be more in tune or comfortable in that particular issue. So bagi kita di sini ni, my articulation is basically it's not where the building is, it's not who you are, but what are we here for? And in this context of coronavirus, now we know it is not just the disease. The disease, I think, is just a symbol. I think what we are here for, the disease has told us there is mass inequitability. And this is why the flattening the curve becomes an important agenda to me. You know, orang yang dah banyak accumulation of wealth ini, you are not doing your duty in the sense of sharing what you've got with other people when other people are basically dying because of lack of food, lack of money, lack of shelter, and here you are with your own castle that you've just fend for yourself. That, I think, is the message for this coronavirus. The disease, people die, yeah, that probably is a symptom of it. By the end of the day, how do you then equalize? That's why di sini kita talk about humanizing education. How do you make human being out of education? We are not going to make entrepreneurs out of education. We are not going to make millionaires out of education. We are not going to make engineers out of education. Those are secondary. There must be human purpose. Once a human, then bila dia jadi millionaire, dia tahu apa nak buat. Once dia jadi human, dia jadi engineer, dia tahu apa nak buat. Yeah, so we need to reconstruct balik the whole idea of what this university is all about. It's about elevating the moral, the dignity of the university to a level that everybody becomes equitable. May not be 100%, but at least the jurang or the gap between one and another will be tolerable. Yeah, and again here Ramadan reminds us. The zakat that we give, the sadaqah that we give, yeah, looking after the neighbors, all of these are about equitability. It's no longer pasal Ramadan that the orang besar beli kereta banyak-banyak. I was reading dalam internet in Thailand, yeah, the billionaires now call Grab, equivalent to Grab, may not be Grab, sorry. To their house, they bring the food. Not only they bring the food, they set the table, they wash the dishes. It's almost like setting up a restaurant in their house, you know, because they can afford it. But this is not what this is all about. So your question to me is basically, what is the sense of purpose? Why are we here? And the coronavirus tells us why we are here, because we need to look after each other. We need to fend for each other. We need to, be mindful of each other, not just ourselves. And then I think we've got the right sense of purpose. Then I think we can easily work with one another. You know, But unless and until that happens, then this tension will be there all the time, and then we need to sort out what the tension is all about. I hope I've answered your question, Nazmi.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tan Sri.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Suhaimi. Tan Sri, one question coming up from the group chat. This is from Rosdiadi Norden from UKM.
Yes.
The question is, a resilient leader also has to make a difficult decision to move forward.
Yes.
Share with us useful tips when in such situation.
Decision is difficult if you don't know where the end point is. Yeah. But when you know what the end point is, then decision is not difficult. To me, what is the end point? The end point is justice. All right. There are two types of leaders. One, the end point is power. The other end point is justice. Now, Al-Ghazali tells us the end point of leadership is justice, not power. All right. And this is sometimes where academicians and politicians do not see eye to eye. Yeah. When we academicians talk about justice, the politicians want to talk about power. And we cannot condone that, because then it will move away from our ideal of what leadership is all about. At the end of the day, whatever decision that I make as a rector, I want to ask myself, have I been just to as many people as I could? And sometimes it's not easy, but that is the end point that I want to arrive at. It's not because I want to do this, it will enhance my power, my contract will be renewed, I'll get another Tan Sri at the end of the day. That is not my end point. My end point is how much of justice do I am able to dispense? Yeah? And justice, you can also say, how much happiness can you bring to the organization? Sometimes justice is difficult to say. How much happiness can you bring to the organization? How much people will say, I want to stay with this organization because it touches me. You know, bukan kata, I want to run from this organization. No, this organization is a horrendous organization. Those are the endpoints I think that you need to decide. And once you decide what the endpoint is, then I think the decision making is just a matter of trying to move as much as possible to that endpoint that you want to. So you want to, if you cannot make the decision yourself, you want to assemble your top management. You know, you want to consult with the people below you. You want to find out what is what's the best mechanism. For me, for example, I'm new here. They have got a 35 years experience of what it's all about. I need to find out what has been happening the last 35 years. Have this been tried out? If this is tried out, is this successful? If it's successful, are people happy? Only or is it or 2 or 3 people happy? So these are the areas of leadership that I think that we need to exercise. And that kind of a leader needs to also tell you that the leadership must go down to the ground, must talk to the people that matters, not just stay in your room, you know, and make decisions out of a context that you probably do not understand. So this leadership things that we talked about is more difficult than it is, because it will then bring about other mechanisms to play, and that mechanism is something that you need to ensure that it runs smoothly. And I go back to the end point now. What is the end point? You as a leader now, what is your end point? Kalau your end point is about yourself, then I think you may want to reconsider, because leadership is not just about yourself, it's about everybody around you. And your position perhaps is the last in this particular context. So the moment you understand where your end point is, then I think decision making is slightly easier in this particular context. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Tan Sri. Now, last questions. I would like to open from the Zoom viewers. Anybody want to ask the last questions?
Yes, Tan Sri.
Yes.
Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam. Tak apa nak dengar.
Boleh dengar?
Boleh.
But to catch you.
Try speak slowly.
Your analogy to bamboo is excellent.
Thank you.
My question is, how can we make people go back to nature? They often forget nature.
Yes.
You refer to nature being resilient, but people are not going back to nature.
Yeah. That is because Tan Sri, if I may, I think you are a forest person. You know this better than I do, because we have isolated education into a building. Education is not supposed to be confined into just a building. I mean, oftentimes when people go to education, they will ask, how big is your classroom? How good is your library? What sort of lab have you got? Which is a valid question, but they don't even understand what is the environment around that building. I mean, we've seen enough of this. Yeah. Nice building, nice structures, the environment around them, people tak peduli pun. In other words, you are just confining your knowledge on on formal knowledge that is captured or codified in books, but you don't look at nature as a source of knowledge. You don't look at experience outside as a source of knowledge. I'm very critical, and I'll voice it again. Kita ada misalnya CEO at faculty. These are top-notch, performers in the corporate world. Fine, yeah. But what about the people in other sectors that are not confined in the corporate world? We do not meet them. People like misalnya the equivalent like yourself or David Attenborough. He has got a different experience altogether, not just the corporate world. But we don't even recognize them. Neither do we touch them, because we think this is not knowledge. Our knowledge has been codified in such a way that it comes only from books. It doesn't come from nature. So this whole idea of what education is all about, I think the coronavirus is telling us, look, there is more than just books. There is more than just, libraries. So the practices of people, the cultural practices of people is part of knowledge. You will not be able to solve this coronavirus issue, Tan Sri, if you don't understand the culture of certain people, for example. Yeah, I think that dimension, when I talked about in my talk, is where we missed it. We just talk about economics. Education now is just about economics, yeah. And that's why we zero down to employability, employment. As long as they're employed, it's okay. But if they're employed and destroy the nature, it's also okay. Because our basic is just employment. So we need to come back to what education is all about. And I hope this coronavirus tells us, because this coronavirus bagi saya is a kind of eye-opener, as an equalizer. Now you have a lot of money, you want to go and get treated, you cannot go to America anymore because they can't even provide you a bed. You need to stay here. So your money has no value anymore. Dulu you got heart problem, you go to Mayo Clinic and get all the best that there is. Now they tell you money does not mean anything anymore until and unless you start to equalize. And this equalizing is where nature comes in. Because in nature is a best equalizer as far as I can say. I'm happy, Tan Sri, in Gombak, I got mountains in front of me, this green mountain. Every day I look at it. I'm trying to also bring my colleagues out into nature and make nature as part and parcel of the the library that we need to source out. I hope I have given you, and it's not just the forest. I think it's a whole nature that we talked about. I think I just want to finish by saying that the moment we are locked up, I think the moment we are locked up, we find that nature breathes more freely. Animals are out. Even in my campus, saya nampak a heron, I see a wild boar coming out, I see wild chicken coming out, a wild fowl coming out. All these things are there hidden for a long time because we have been monopolizing the place. The moment we let these people also some space, then we begin to see how beautiful nature is. Thank you for the question, Tan Sri. I hope we are able to do something about it. Inshallah.
Yeah, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much, Tan Sri. So I believe we have reached to the end of the session. I may ask Tan Sri to give some last points to the audience, Tan Sri.
Well, my humble last point is basically we need to be who we are. I think we need to be the human being we are, and this is where I think Tan Sri Saleh punya question. The moment we understand we are, then we understand suddenly we are part of nature. And we part of nature, then we need to build our relationship with nature. We are not that single paragon human being because we have got brains, because we have moved to the moon, and therefore we need to destroy everything else around us that do not meet our standards. Yeah, that's first thing. And human being has got what we call the human scale. We cannot build anything which is bigger than we are because we are not able to control it. Now, the tendency now is to make things bigger and bigger and bigger. As we build things bigger and bigger, we will lose control. At the end of the day, this is what's going to happen. Yeah. So I think we need to understand the human scale. The human scale allows us to do only certain things that is within our control. Beyond that, I think we're just going to destroy ourselves. So this whole idea of growth, we need to reintrospective think about it. Nothing grow and grow and grow and grow. Human being tells us that you cannot grow forever. You will die at one point. The only thing that grows forever is the cancer cells. Now, you know what happens to cancer cells. Cancer cell will die at the end of the day because they cannot stop growing. Now, we need to take those lessons. Those are lessons from nature. Those are lessons not from scientists. Those are lessons, from nature that tells us, look, if you go against this nature punya what they call understand of resiliency, I think we are going to go into a space that we will not be able to come out. People like me, okay, I'm already now 70 years old. I probably will not have much years to live. But think of the younger generation that we are responsible for. If we don't put this right, I think we are all going to be accountable for this, inshallah. So my suggestion is go back to ourselves, understand ourselves, lead ourselves, and I think the rest will follow suit, inshallah, dalam konteks ini. Yeah. So I would like to thank everybody for the rambling that I've got. It certainly gives me an encouragement to think more about this, and I hope we can come up with some sort of a solution. When the government say education is this way, I thought we will probably have our own understanding of what education is, given the experiences that we have for these few months and maybe the years to come, inshallah. So terima kasih banyak, and I apologize for whatever shortcomings and mistakes that I make. Hopefully, we'll have a better Ramadan moving forward. So selamat berpuasa, selamat berbuka. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi taala wabarakatuh.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much, Tan Sri. I am sure that everyone has benefited from your input and wisdom. So on behalf of the organizing committee, Dato Abdul Rahim, ED, MST, and also the members of PMA, I would like to express our sincere thanks to Yang Bahagia Tan Sri Emeritus Dato Dzulkifli Abdul Razak for his willingness to spend his time with us. I also would like to convey our sincere appreciation to each and everyone who has participated in our session for today. Before we adjourn, could I request all participants to switch on your video camera in order for the secretary to take picture of all of our cheerful image. This one we would like to record in our archive. So you may switch on your video. Okay, the secretary will